Okay. Um, we're recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. We are recording the webinar and we'll make this available on YouTube within about a week of today. My name is Kelsey Bram, and I'm a dairy and grazing specialist at UVM Extension. And I'm here with our main presenter today, Daryll Breau, who is the co-owner of Ayers Brook Goat Dairy here in Vermont, as well as a technical service provider with UVM Extension. And the title of today's workshop is, yes, Raising Dairy Goat Bucklings, Perspectives from France and Opportunities for the Northeast. And yeah, here we go. So before we dive into Daryll's presentation about her trip to France, I wanted to give some background about the goat dairy research and technical assistance that's been happening at UVM Extension since 2022. So we're currently in the second round of research and technical assistance at UVM. The first round and this current round were both funded by the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, and the previous round of research was co-funded by Vermont Creamery. This current round, the objectives of the project were to provide milk quality services, testing, and parlor audits to goat dairies in the state of Vermont, to further refine a financial calculator tool, and to do some more regional outreach to goat dairies across the Northeast. The team at UVM working on goat dairy includes Dan Baker, Mark Canella, Whitney Hull, Zach Smith, me, and we've also been really fortunate to have Daryll Breau and Holly Menguch, who, as part of our team, they're both commercial goat dairy farmers here in Vermont, and they have been working as technical service providers for this project as well. And it's been amazing to have their experience as farmers and their knowledge, both for our team and for the farmers that they're working with. So the heart of this round of goat dairy research and technical assistance was milk quality testing and interviews. We enrolled 16 goat dairies from across Vermont. They were a mix. Folks would please mute when they come in. That would be great. The farms were a mix of both farmstead creameries, folks who processed their milk on farm, and folks who shipped fluid milk to a processor. And there was a big range in sizes across these 16 farms, so as small as 14 milking does and as large as 950. These farms received on-farm milk testing and parlor audits with Cornell's Quality Milk Production Services and a UVM service provider, which happened mostly over the course of 2025. After those visits, each farm received a follow-up visit where they discussed the findings of the audit and testing and some recommended management strategies. And then after that, each farmer had a one-on-one interview with a service provider from UVM. So this is all background to get to this context of, we asked these farmers in these interviews some questions about how they manage bucklings on their farms. So of the 16 farms interviewed, and a reminder that these are farms of like very running the gamut from very small to very large. Half of them reported that managing bucklings on their farm is stressful or very stressful, while the other half reported that buckling management is low, moderate, or ranged from low to very stressful. And of those 16 farms interviewed, 15 reported out what they did with their bucklings, how they managed them. So half reported having a reliable market, and fully half said that they don't have a reliable market for their bucklings. Nearly half sold to a private buyer or buyers, and only one reported selling their bucklings to a livestock dealer as their primary market. And 3 farms used euthanasia of their bucklings, either in whole or in part, as part of their management strategy. So with that context of how buckling management is going on those farms we interviewed in Vermont, I want to pass it over to Daryll. We will have time for questions and discussion after Daryl's presentation, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And if any clarification questions come up, we'll call those out and answer those as we go, and we'll save up some of the bigger questions for discussion at the end. So I'll pass it over to you, Daryll. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited about the number of people that have signed up for this webinar. Clearly, Kelsey and I and this UVM team are not the only people thinking about this. So hopefully maybe this conversation, this presentation conversation is the start of a bigger conversation that might actually, something might materialize from this. So anyway, let me introduce myself. My name is Daryll Breau. I'm married to Miles Hooper, and we have Ayers Brook Goat Dairy in Randolph, Vermont. Right now we're milking about 500, and we're in the midst of an expansion project with the hopes to milk at least 1,000, 1,200 goats in total. So, right now, dealing with our bucklings is already a struggle. As our herd grows, it will just continue to be even more of a struggle and stress point. And so it would be, and I know from talking to other farmers that their experience is the same. And so it would be so great if we could all put our minds and resources together to come up with a solution. So over Thanksgiving, my husband and I, we went to France to attend the Caprenov conference in Niort, France. If you're interested in dairy goats, it is the largest conference, I think, that happens in the world, and it is awesome. And while we were there in our spare time, we went and visited a number of dairies, but then also we went to this fattening farm. And I was just blown away by the caliber of this place and just the number of bucklings that they raise. And it was just such a professional operation that I just had to come back and share what I saw with everybody. So I just want to say one disclaimer is that, keep in mind that France is different. The regulations are different. The inputs available are different, so I'm dubious that we can copy this setup exactly, but there's so much that we can learn from this and implement here in the Northeast. So I hope you guys feel the same way. And here we go. So this farm raises about 75,000 bucklings a year from many farms they collect. And they're one of 5, I think that's correct, large fattening farms in France. So that just gives you an idea of the number of dairy goats that are in farms that are in France. But they buy all their bucklings from farms in their region for 1 to 3 euros, which is, you can see the conversion here. So it's not much. And they recognize that. But I think at this point, it's really the best they can do. They raise them till they are 35 pounds, which takes approximately 6 weeks, and then they're sent to slaughter. And as you can imagine, it's a very small margin. The profit margin is very small. Therefore, they have to raise a lot of them. And this picture is the pen with the youngest buckling. So they go around, I think it's every day or every other day. A lot of the farms in France tend to have a similar kidding schedule, which makes this whole process run a bit smoother. So there's this influx of bucklings. So once a day, every other day, they go around to their farms, they pick up the bucklings, they bring them back, and they throw them into these large pens. And, you may be surprised sort of by the stocking density, but as you can see, nobody's scouring. Everybody looks great. This is just like an initial phase. They then sort them into groups based on their size. And the groups are the training groups, which is where they will train them to the milk feeder. And they sort them based on size to help mitigate sort of competition at the feeder. They don't want a small kid with a large kid fighting for the same nipple. So here you can see the setup sort of, this is later on. So, they've weeded out a lot of them, but the gates that are hanging on the wall, everything was built by hand, everything was wooden, everything could, move, change, they could orient the pens differently, but they use those gates on the wall to sort of subdivide the pens for the smaller groups initially when they're training them to the feeder. And this, they said, was like the most labor intensive part. And if any of you have automatic milk machines, like, that training them can be kind of arduous, but once they learn the machine, they're eating independently. So this kind of, I just included this picture so you could see the pens hanging on the walls. And everything is like at such a large scale. So anyway, the barn is divided. The barn is divided into 3 sections. It's long. There's 2 large pens on either end of the barn, and in the middle, there's a warm room, and it's completely closed off, I think mostly for fly mitigation and also temperature control and all of that. And so this is the machine that mixes the milk replacer. And it's all on demand. And sorry, just to take a step back, first PowerPoint presentation, but in order to ensure their low mortality rate of 10%, there are some key infrastructure details that must be put in place. So yeah, and I'll talk about the mortality rate in a little bit, but it was quite impressive considering the number of animals that they bring into this place. So free choice milk, right? If you're going to raise that many, you're obviously doing bucket feeding or pail feeding or all the other milk feeding systems is just not feasible. Plus, they just don't grow as fast. So in order to get full growth in the shortest period of time, they put them on the automatic milk feeding machine using a milk replacer that's probably whey protein based, just because that tends to add the weight the fastest. So, and they don't get anything else. No grain, no hay, no water. It's just milk replacer. And so here's the machine kind of spanned out a little bit. And so once the milk is mixed, it gets piped into the pens from there. I know I'm moving pretty quickly, but there's a lot to cover here. So I think initially, and bear in mind that when I visited this site, I didn't know I was going to be doing a presentation on it. So I may not have answers to all of your questions, but this is antibiotics, liquid antibiotics that they add right into the milk replacer. And so they pick up the bucklings. There's no expectation on the farmer to provide them with colostrum to feed them or anything. They recognize that because they're paying so little that they can't expect the farmer to do anything in exchange. So, there's a high probability that bucklings will arrive at this facility having no colostrum. They have no immunity. They're just like so super vulnerable. So they really feel that like it's necessary to, as a preventative measure, to add the liquid antibiotics to the milk replacer. And I think they only do that in the initial phases. And I'm not sure what the meat withhold for antibiotics is in France. I know that over there they have drugs that are specifically approved for goats, whereas in the United States, a lot of stuff is off label. So I'm sure they have that figured out, but I do know that initially they pump antibiotics into the milk replacer. But yeah, so they arrive from these farms, they have no immunity, just assume that they didn't get any colostrum, and they're also commingling, goats from all over the place, which, as we know, is a problem sometimes in itself. So the antibiotics is seemingly kind of an important part of the procedure. So this is what the automatic milk feeder looks like. I had never seen one like this before. I'm mostly just familiar with the Foster Technic machines, which we use on our farm, and I love it. But anyway, so the milk gets pumped directly to this on an on-demand setup. The machine is cleaned every day. Without fail, cleanliness is like a super important facet of keeping these animals healthy. But there's 12 nipples for 200 to 300 goats. So it's pretty remarkable the number of bucklings that you can feed from just one machine once everybody's trained. And they continue to sort them based on size. So if there's a kid that's just growing super fast, they'll put them in a different group. So they always have eyes on all the kids and how they're progressing and just continue to sort of sort them, because it doesn't matter how old they are. It only matters when they get to their 35-pound weight. But it keeps the milk warm. It does all the thing. It agitates it so that I guess it probably doesn't sit around. It doesn't probably have an agitator, but it's just a constant stream of properly mixed milk replacer that's at the right temperature. In that middle room where that initial mixing machine was, they have a water softening system, which they just have so much infrastructure with water running through it and all of that I think it's an important facet to the operation. And this could be a sort of a big difference. They get milk replacer in bulk. So these are two bins that they have, and the truck comes just like the grain truck, and it fills the bins with the milk replacer. And I don't know to what extent this will make or break an operation. But it would be something worth, exploring to see if that was a possibility. Okay, so another way in which they are able to maintain their incredibly low 10% mortality rate is ventilation. So I'm sort of breaking down their success into what I deemed into 4 or 5 different parts. The first one was constant milk, clean machine. And so here, the second one is ventilation. So each side of the barn had 2 of these large ventilation pipes, which is constantly just sucking out the ammonia in the air. And I'm not exactly sure where the air comes in, but these windows here on the side, it was pretty cold when we were there, so I think everything was pretty well buttoned up, but they have the ability to tilt open so they can have more fresh air in the summertime. And we were also there at night, which is why you don't see any light coming through those windows. But there was lots of bright light in the pen. I don't know how long they leave the lights on. It was interesting. Lighting wasn't really a huge thing on the dairy farms that we went to, like compared to like the cow dairies here that are very focused on the number of hours of daylight. But I think in this fattening farm, because they want to encourage the kids to eat as much as possible, I think they leave the lights on for quite a long time. So, right, as we all know, ventilation is super important in terms of like respiratory disease. And that was really the only thing that I saw in terms of health issues in the bucklings. I definitely saw some heavy breathing, which, I mean, it's to be expected when you have so many animals that don't really have an immunity. But for us, that are trying to raise raise dolings to maturity, having a respiratory disease as a kid can have long-lasting impacts. But if you're planning on slaughtering them when they're 35 pounds, as long as they're eating and growing, and I suppose if it was really severe, you could have issues with smothering and stuff. But it doesn't really get to the point where it's an issue, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. So, but still, the air was so clean. The air smelled so clean, which you never would have expected from a facility that's raising this many animals. But it was incredible. So some sort of ventilation system is definitely important. Right. And then the third facet of this, which contributed to our success, is the bedding. And it's really interesting. So this long yellow tube that you see, they have a large machine, like there's tons of straw in France. And so everybody uses large square bales of straw. And they put these large square bales in this machine that grinds it out, and it has a blower, and then they connect this, they drive it alongside the building and they connect this yellow hose, and the blower blows the straw through this tube, and they basically hold the tube and walk down the length of the pen and just blow fresh bedding in the pens every day. So every day they're getting clean bedding, which helps with air quality, helps with cleanliness, it helps with, whatever, ingesting bacteria, all the reasons why, we should be bedding our goats down properly. But I thought that this tubing system was so ingenious, especially if you're trying to have an operation that's in a small space, and, bedding by hand is just the worst, or then you need to have tons of equipment. And I mean, they still had a large piece of equipment to process the bales, but I think that that's something that you could figure out if you had to, but blowing it through the tube I thought was ingenious. And so anyway, this was a daily routine for them. And then of course, heat, which would definitely, us being in the Northeast with the weather that we have, would be an important factor to prevent smothering, but also growth. Like if they're trying to stay warm, they're going to put energy towards that and not to growing. So these were their heat lamps that they had. And as you can see, I mean, these bucklings, they look great. They're clean. They're growing. You can see here's the heat lamp, the gates on the wall. They have plenty of space to roam. And then the last thing that they provided was bentonite clay. And I think it has digestive, as a digestive aid, but also I think it helps with sore mouth. And honestly, compared to some of the other farms and the kids that we saw, sore mouth was not an issue at all on this farm. And I think one of the reasons why is when they pick the bucklings up so quickly from the farms, they don't really have a chance to contract anything that's floating around the farm that they're born on, and so it's kind of a win-win situation. Win for the farmer because the babies are gone so long, and a win for the buckling buyer because their animals are coming cleaner than they would if they had hung out, at the farm for a week in whatever kind of conditions they were in, just contracting whatever, bacteria, diseases, viruses are hanging around. So, yeah. And then these guys are pretty much time to slaughter. And when it's time to slaughter them, I think they've processed so many that they just kind of eyeball. So they'll walk down the different barns, sort of, they rotate him. So this barn, I think they had 3 different barns. This barn will have the youngest, and then they grow, and then they put the next batch in the next barn and next. So they kind of are rotating along through the barns, and they just go through and eyeball them and pick them up. And they're like, yeah, this guy's 35 pounds. Or they'll bring a scale and they'll stand on the scale and know what their weight is. And then they just pick up the buckling, and that's how they determine how heavy the buckling is. And then they transport them themselves to the slaughterhouse. And unfortunately, I don't really know the details after that. But their markets are, I think eating cabrito, or like buckling in Spain, is quite common. Also, any of the ethnic communities, the immigrant communities that are in France or Spain or any of those European countries, I think that's where these all mostly go. And here again, here is sort of your closest group. And I think that, yeah, they go through every couple weeks and pick out a truckload and send them off. So these are sort of the requirements in my mind that you would have to have in place to get this going. Obviously, a connection for the final market for your bucklings. Now, some of us in Vermont feel kind of stranded, but even in southern Vermont, there seemingly way more connected to the auctions and the livestock, the markets down in Boston and New York and Pennsylvania. Um, so just making sure you have that connect and like that final destination is obviously an important part of this business. The farmers to supply the bucklings, your facility, barn or any industrial building with, you need good drainage, not super drafty, good ventilation, all the things we talked about, good lighting. You have to have overhead doors you can clean. Now, I think that they just clean the pens after a group has either been moved out. I don't think they move them from barn to barn. I think they're in their spot or in their barn until they're 35 pounds. The pen is emptied and then they come in and they clean. But the straw is like cut up pretty fine. And even though they bed them down that day, I don't think it really piles up too high, but you definitely need a way to get into the barn to clean it with a piece of equipment. So you need a skid steer, a tractor. A lot of people in France have like those mini telehandlers that they use for pen cleaning. You need a system for bedding down the pens. So if you have something in place, that's great. I thought that the blower was great. Landscapers use that with small straw bales when they need to blow straw on an area that they've seeded down. An automatic milk feeding machine. So the Foster Technic, I just looked it up the other day. Premier One is one place where you can get them. I know that there's other. Grover is a Canadian company. I think it's a Canadian company. So on just from Fremont, just so you have a sense, they're about $7,800. But they can feed up to 200 bucklings, and it's like an incredible labor saving machine. Like everybody that gets one, like they'll just never go back from an automatic feeder. It keeps the milk the right temperature. It keeps the milk replacer suspended. They can eat as much as they want at any time of day. You never walk into a barn with like screaming kids that are hungry. They grow faster. They don't get bloat from overconsumption because they're so hungry. They learn how to moderate. They're just perfect. So it seems expensive, but I think the payoff happens quite quickly. Employees, of course, like they said, the most demanding part was teaching the kids to use the feeder. Some kids learn quickly, some kids it takes a little bit longer. And you can continue to sort the goats as soon as a goat knows what they're doing, you move them out. And then you just keep training the ones that need more help. But once they're trained, I think, excuse me, I think chores can mostly happen in the morning, and you got to clean the feeder, you do the fresh bedding, but there's no hay, there's no water buckets, there's none of that to mess around with. There's no grain, and then it's just keeping an eye, making sure everybody is up and moving around. And but I don't think they spend a lot of time treating animals or like, any of an individualized attention. I don't think that they give any of the kids individualized attention. I think that their model is like get them in and get them out, and because their margin is so small, they just can't afford probiotics and all the other stuff that some of us do. I think just keeping, having those 4 things in place and just continuing to stay on top of things is the ticket to success. And then you need transportation for picking up the bucklings and then delivering them to the slaughterhouse or the auction or wherever their final destination might be. So as I started thinking about this setup, I was like just drooling over the concept, like, oh my God, it would be so great if during kidding season, the same person just came to my farm every other day and took my bucklings, it works because farmers are able to offload their bucklings quickly. Some people have built up a network and they don't have any problem. Like the research said at the beginning of this presentation, 50% have no problem getting rid of their bucklings. Now, whatever size their farm is, I don't know, but I know from my experience and some other farmers who have larger farms, it's difficult. And it's time consuming, and they take up space, and they have to be tended to, if that's what your choice is. So offloading them quickly, it minimizes the cost of raising them. It alleviates space in your facility, like creating more space for the doelings or the animals you're trying to keep. It frees up your employees to do other work. They're not bottle feeding bucklings that you're basically going to give away anyway. And it eliminates the need to market them and coordinate pickups. Like sometimes coordinating with the people to get rid of your bucklings is the most time expensive part. Or you save a group and then they don't show up, and like everybody's had these experiences. It just makes the process so frustrating. So it also discourages, at birth euthanasia, at birth culling. And you can get some income from it. It's not much, but you're getting something. And also, it's nice to know that these animals are serving a purpose and are providing food, and being part of the whole thing. And also this last one, it didn't occur to me at first, but it kind of occurred to me. I had an experience on my own farm, but farmers have the assurance that their animals are headed to the slaughterhouse and not used on other farms. So if you're a larger farm, or even a smaller farm, or whatever, and you've invested in your genetics, we've imported a lot of semen from abroad and stuff. Even despite that, not every goat is your best goat, right? And so you may have people that say, "Oh, I'm gonna get a couple bucklings from." They're selling bucklings or giving them away. I'm gonna get a couple bucklings from this farm, and I'm gonna raise them and I'm gonna stud them out. And they're from this farm, so they're gonna be good. Well, you would have saved your best bucks, right, to use as breeding on your own farm. And so you're kind of putting your genetics out there in a way. If they do raise them up and stud them out, you're putting your genetics out there in a way that like you can't control, which for me is something that I think about, and it may be something that other people think about too, or maybe other people don't care. But for me, it would be nice. It's nice to know like the final destination of your animals sometimes. And so, just this idea that like I know that the bucklings are not going to be used for breeding. I'm not putting my worst animals out there, right? And that they're just going to be sent to the slaughterhouse for me, and it's a done deal, end of story. Like that is reassuring for me. Right. So then if you're peddling your bucklings to like, ones and twosies to this guy and that guy, and a group here and a group there, that's a lot of people coming to your farm. And if you're concerned at all about biosecurity or even liability, it's nice to like, if we were to, in this scenario, there's one guy that comes to your farm, them, you have a relationship with them, that they're taking the necessary measures, biosecurity measures to reduce any kind of cross contamination. I mean, it just sort of the routine of it and the assurance of knowing what's going on and who they are, like that to me is a big plus. Also, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced, you sell a buckling and then maybe they, because of the transition, the buckling is scouring, and then they call you and like, "Oh, I don't know what to do. My buckling is scouring." And you're like, well, it just becomes a bigger deal. And of course, I'm not just going to leave them to figure it out on their own. I will help them through that, but it's still somehow like my responsibility. And so in this situation, once the bucklings are sold to this buckling farmer, it's no longer my responsibility, which is the whole point, right? And also it could have some good herd management implications if you had somebody that would, if you had 30 bucklings born in a day and you knew that you had somebody to come and was going to take them all, because that was sort of like the contract. It may have some breeding implications if you want to set goats up, or, you decide, okay, I want to get all my goats bred in this month. I know I have a source for these bucklings, and you can just sort of, you don't have to worry about that. So those in my mind are some of the advantages for why you may decide, okay, well, I'm not going to make as much money if I do it this way. I can get $15 per buckling if I, market them myself. But for me, all of these other advantages kind of outweighs the profit, or I don't even think it's profitable. I think it's a break even scenario, but these are all some serious advantages in my mind. And then if you're someone who's looking at being the buckling farmer, you know, the farmer can operate at a large scale. You know, if you have a relationship with farmers and you're going around and collecting bucklings from lots of farms, picking up the bucklings frequently, while it may seem like a pain and not really worth the travel time, you know, some people say, oh, well, it's hard for me to make the trip for just 5, or it's hard for me to make the trip for just 2. Well, if you were going around and you're going to all the dairy farms in Vermont and picking up all the bucklings that were born that day, and we could all sort of work together in that way, you know, that obviously would help, make it more cost effective. But also it justifies the low price that you're paying them. If you're only paying them $2 or $3 a buckling, you can't really, like these French farmers, expect the farmers to do much in exchange for that. But also, like I said earlier, the less time the buckling spends on their home farm picking up diseases, or whatever it is, bacteria, like the better it is, the faster the buckling can get to the facility where they're going to have warm milk, clean bedding, fresh air, heat, all the things, the more success, the higher the success rate, I think. And like I said, these kids were some of the best looking kids that I saw in all of the farms that we visited. Let's see. Yeah, the model is straightforward, has a solid supplying industry, and it could be seasonal. Right now in Vermont, there's a lot of farms that are kidding year round, which is a difference from France. They do more seasonal kidding, so that won't directly translate. But I think you would definitely have, busy times and then slower times. Or you could just stipulate, yeah, great, I will take your bucklings from the month of, from February to June, and then, fall kidding or something. That's a different business model. But and yeah, so anyway, that's sort of the gist of it. But I think it has a lot of potential, and I know that there's a need. And I know that there will be a growing need as more dairy farms get started and as the established dairy farms continue to grow. So thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Daryll. I'm looking forward to jumping into questions and discussion after this. We're going to take a quick pause before we get to questions and discussion. I see there's one in the chat already, and ask you all in attendance to please fill out this super quick survey. I'm going to drop the link in the chat, or you can scan that QR code with your phone. It'll really only take 2 minutes, so if you don't mind clicking over. It's for farmers, service providers, and researchers, anyone working with sheep and goats, small ruminants. We're trying to get a better picture regionally of what farmers need, and if they have resources. If you're a farmer and you have a service provider that you work with and would recommend, we would love to know that. If you are a service provider working with small ruminants, we would love to know that too. The survey is anonymous, but there is an option if you want to stay in touch at the end to share your contact info, which will be collected separately from the survey. So we'll just take a couple minutes right now, pause, and then we'll come back and get into questions and discussion.
Again, any feedback, it doesn't have to be a question, but any kind of discussion would be great. There's a lot of people on this webinar, and it would be great to hear from people, their insights, thoughts.
I had a couple questions.
Yep.
I know you mentioned that you weren't really familiar with what happens with the goats after they go to the abattoir, but I'm just sort of curious. Ha- when they're passed on, do you know if they are broken down into halves or sold whole? How are they sold in the market? Is my sort of my question, and I don't know whether you know the answer to that or not.
My hunch is that they're sold whole.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, because I think at 35 pounds live weight, but I don't know for sure, but I think that they're sold whole. At least I know that like the tradition of eating cabrito is I think they cook the goat whole all at once and then they,
Yeah.
they cut it up after it's been cooked. But I think it's whole.
Yeah. One of the things that was really striking for me that in this operation, the cost of the animal is the smallest expense.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, just what, wow. It's like,
Yeah. And I think and I just think it's such a mutually beneficial, like the farmers are just so glad to have a place to send their bucklings. Like money saved is like money, whatever the expression is. It's like they made more money on the bucklings because they didn't have to spend any money raising them, kind of a situation. So right. And they said they would pay more if they could, but for them it's all that they can do. I don't think these guys are making money hand over fist, but they are making it is what they do. It's their living. They obviously have the means to like, provide what the goats need to have a successful operation. So um but right. Yeah. So that yeah.
yeah. So this operation, how do they deal with its seasonality? Of, you know,
Yeah, in
lots
terms
of,
of like labor, like staff and
well,
stuff.
I would imagine at certain times of the year they're full capacity, and other times of the year they're not. Uh,
Yeah, I think so. So they said that their staff like doesn't mind working seasonally.
okay.
So I think you just have to find people that are open to like the seasonal aspect of the job. Um, I don't, it's seasonal, but I think that they really only shut down for maybe a couple months.
Okay.
Because I know in France they do a fall kidding. A lot of farms kid in the fall and they kid in the spring. But the kidding in the spring tends to be shorter. It's not like at our farm, we start in February and kid all the way to June. It's more condensed. So I wouldn't be surprised if like their facilities are empty in like July and August. And then come September, they start filling up again, and they might have a lull somewhere in December and then, start back up again.
Thanks for the questions, Dave.
Yeah.
We've got some more questions and discussion happening in the chat. Pull some of those. Feel free to add to the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and come off mute, that would be great too. So Dan asked, do they accept cull dolings? And Logan asked, do they accept all breeds?
Yeah, so I just don't think there's a lot of cull dolings. I'm sure they would. It's just I think that most farms keep their dolings because they in France they turn over their herd a lot faster than a lot of like American goat dairies do. We have goats that are in their fourth, fifth lactation. Like in France, it's a lot of like two, maybe three lactations, maybe. So they're always like raising lots of replacements. And I think even in the United States or in the Northeast, I should say, you can sell a doling. Like if you're willing to hold on to a doling, you can sell a doling for enough money to make a profit. So I think they probably, I don't, even if we were to implement this same thing here, I don't think there would be many dolings because it's just a better money maker for farms, or they're trying to raise them for replacements. So I didn't see any dolings. It was all bucklings. And then all
All
breeds.
breeds.
Yeah, they accept all breeds. It's just France is very like the French Alpine and Saanen. that's pretty much all that they raise there. Like I was showing them pictures of La Manchas and they were just totally aghast. Um, so, but they would, I don't, they would accept any, I think if it's a buckling, they'll take it. So.
Great. There's some related questions. Caitlin says, my immediate thought is there's nowhere that could handle that many bucklings for slaughter in her area, which is Maine, in their area.
Sorry, there's not a facility that could handle that many, or there's not enough farms to supply that many.
Nowhere that could handle that. I'm imagining a facility, and Ingrid is asking, do we have a fattening farm in New England or the Northeast?
I mean, any kind of like industrial building, really. I mean, I think drainage is the one. We raised bucklings in an industrial building, or not bucklings, sorry, our kids. We raised kids in an industrial building one year, and I mean, it was great. It had already had the overhead doors. It was all concrete, so easy to clean, easy to sanitize. Um, there's oftentimes fans and stuff for good ventilation, especially if it was like an auto mechanic shop or something else. So I think like sometimes old barns are, in my mind, not always the best for an animal environment. They can be dark, they can be drafty, they can be difficult to clean. They're all subdivided, so any sort of building, as long as you can make sure that it's like airtight with good ventilation and you can get in there with a skid steer, I think would be appropriate. But whether you have the farms within a nice driving distance is the question. Now, I don't know exactly how far these guys go. There's a lot more farms, so it's more concentrated. But
Caitlin asked that question if you knew how far they were driving in France to pick bucklings up.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna guess like within a 60-mile radius.
Okay. So as far as I know, to this question, do we have a fattening farm in the Northeast? Not as far as I know, right?
Yeah.
Daryl? Yeah.
No, I think a lot of people, send their bucklings they end up going to Connecticut or Massachusetts or Pennsylvania. But I mean, that is, I guess, technically the Northeast, but, and I don't know exactly where everybody is tuning in from. But it's like everybody raises a little bit. There's not a concentrated a place where they concentrate them. So
kind of on the marketing side, Dorian had asked, do we need to educate people to make goat meat more friendly to be eaten? I wonder if you have thoughts on.
my thought is like right now, just tap into like the immigrant community. And I just think that's a hard row to hoe to get Americans to, or whatever, people that are used to eating beef, to switch over to goat. But I think that there's enough of a new American community to consume what we can produce. It's just a matter of getting it to them. I mean, I know if you go to some of the stores in Burlington, they're importing goat meat from Australia. So it's just networking and making those connections and getting the transportation down and all of that. That's my opinion. I don't.
Great. Ken, if you want to ask your question, come off mute, would be great. If not, we have Ingrid asked you, Daryl, what you do with your doelings.
Well, we're trying to grow our herd, so we save all of our doelings. We try to raise all of our doelings to be replacements. I mean, we occasionally will sell a couple here and there, but yeah, we're not at the point right now where we're selling doelings as well.
Okay, Ken, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, hi. It's not Ken, it's Elisa, but I couldn't figure out how to change my name. So I missed the very, very beginning. But was your impression, I have two questions. Was your impression after all of this visit that perhaps dairy farmers could form a little co-op to hire someone to do all of this and create a large facility within some certain distance to bring all of the bucklings and raise them for us. Because in my experience, it's like easy come, easy go. Every couple of years, I get a good buyer and then they disappear. Part of it, because of what you were saying, that annoying thing where people buy up your animals and then unbeknownst to you, they start raising them on their own and form a little goat herd of their own based on their cheap genetics that they got from you. And my other question was about drainage, because do you have any idea of how they were handling drainage? Because for us raising our bucklings and doelings, there is just so much urine that's created, and that's a huge issue for us.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'll actually answer the drainage question first. I unfortunately don't quite remember how the setup is, but I know if you have 300 animals that are drinking ad lib milk, like there's the pens are going to be wet. You need drainage. And so I have a feeling that they kind of sloped into the middle, and because I know that they clean the automatic feeder every day and there's drainage right there in the middle. So I just like had this feeling that they had drainage running along the middle of the barn and that the pens were kind of slightly sloped into the middle. That I think that was what my impression was, but I'm not entirely sure. But I totally hear your concern. You need to have good drainage in place for sure. And I wish I had thought about that when I was taking pictures. And then the second thing about forming kind of like a co-op, I think that would be great. Like if there was a model where we could get farmers to invest themselves into a facility, and I don't know anything about co-ops or how they work, but that may be how we're able to get this done if there's not a single person who really wants to take the risk. But I think as goat farming becomes more of a thing and farms continue to grow, I think that could be an attractive business model. Yeah, and like, or part is like you give them your, but whatever your input is, or whatever your contribution, or whether you pay like a monthly fee or like whatever, whatever it is. I'm not entirely sure, but I think I think there's a lot of potential in that model. And then I just am seeing a question right here. Do you know how much they were getting for the finished kit? I think they were getting €3 a pound. So at 35 pounds, right? That's 105 euros. So I don't know, was it $115 or something? Which, yeah. And obviously don't quote me on that. And I'm sure that it fluctuates, but I think that's what he said they were getting. And I don't know if that was hanging weight or live weight.
There's some good discussion in the chat. Dan Baker, who's part of the UVM Goat Dairy team, says one of the bottlenecks to selling some of the new Americans and ethnic markets is lack of halal slaughter facilities in Vermont. That has led some buyers to import goat meat from out of state rather than buy and slaughter goats here. And then Caitlin says that that Five Pillars in Unity, Maine is attempting to start a meat co-op, and they are a halal butcher. Ingrid said they may have stalled. Another good question from Brooke, is anyone crossbreeding dairy goats to something like a boar, to a meat goat breed, like cow dairies are breeding to beef, Angus, or does the short growing time not make it worth it?
I mean, I do know of a farm that does that. They raise them though to, I don't know if it's to a certain size or to a certain weight, but it's not like they're offloading them immediately. But that is a strategy. Now, if you're if you're only, if you want to get rid of your bucklings right off and you're only getting $1 or $3, whether it's worth like changing up your management style to cross breed them. I don't know. I think that really works if you're raising them yourself and you're selling them, you're taking them to the auction and you're trying to sort of maximize your margin. But yeah, that's definitely a strategy that if you're not trying to grow your herd and you don't want a replacement out of that doe, out of that milker, and you want to crossbreed her with the buck. We tried that a little bit at our farm years ago. And it just was like kind of a distraction from what we were trying to do. But yeah, that's totally possible. I don't think anybody does that in France, really. They're so like in their like dairy. That I don't think they mess around with boar goats too much, but yeah, no, it's a great idea.
Imagine, like you said, it largely depends on the market you have for your bucklings and then your overall business model. Are you shipping
Right.
farm to creamery? How do all the pieces of your income and expenses fit together? So there's a great conversation I'd love to touch on here. So Justin asked, do you think this system could be profitable or feasible for a dairy to do at their own facility with dedicated staffing? In other words, would the increased labor and supply costs of raising bucklings at your farm be recuperated, or are margins too slim to make it worthwhile? Wondering if there's a scale of dairy where this would work. And then Ken, I think you said Alyssa was your name. You said you are doing this. I'm wondering if you wanted to come off mute and share about that. If not, that's fine. But yeah, I'm curious about that. And Cassie asks as well, what age do you raise to and what is your end market? Oh, and here you answered. Yeah.
Hi, this is Ken, Elisa.
Elisa. Okay.
I was responding to a verbal, I think it was a verbal question about crossbreeding.
Oh, crossbreeding. Okay, so you don't have the
to a meat breed.
Okay.
And whether it's worth it to do that system like the dairy cow farmers are doing. And yes, we keep a boar buck on the premises every year and crossbreed to all of our dairy does that we know that we're not keeping the kids. And then I responded again, a lot of it has to do with we're located in New York, and there is a lot of prejudice that developed early on against dairy kids. People recognize the boar breed and they will not even look at dairy kids. They only want boar kids, or they pay more money for the boar kids. So that's one of the reasons why we do that.
Are they babies when you sell them, or are they weaned?
Babies, not weaned.
So like newborns or
everything. We'll do, if we can, we'll do as early as possible, a day or two, or sell at auction around 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes 4 if we have to. It's every year it's different because we just have to roll with the punches. We started a couple of years ago an ad lib with one of these automatic feeders, and I've been trying to do more research as to trying to scale up and whether it's worth it. So I find this was like the perfect timing for you to jump in and talk about this.
Well, I think the boar thing is great, but it doesn't really solve the problem of the bucklings that are born out of your dairy goats that you bred to a dairy buck. It solves some of the problem, but we still have the problem of kids of bucklings being born from that are dairy bucklings, like you said.
Yes.
So, and whether you could do this at your own facility, I mean, I think it depends if you have the space. The whole point is like not to compromise the space that you need for your doelings. But if you have extra space, like I said, the stocking density at this farm was like incredible, like goats are herd animals anyway. So you put them in this big pen and then they're all just like together anyway. And I think as long as you have certain things in place, I don't think you need a ton of space to raise 200 or 300 bucklings. You just need to invest in certain infrastructure to make sure that you can do it without losing them. And honestly, I mean, I know people that, they won't come up until, they get a group of 15 or 20, which I understand. It costs money to drive the truck and the transportation and everything. And they don't want to be bottle feeding ones and twosies, but they don't always make it. They don't always make the ride back because the farmer is, having to take care, sort of again, begrudgingly take care of this big group until they have a group that's large enough to sell. And I mean, if your facilities aren't the way they need to be, it's like, it doesn't matter if you have 5 or 10 or 20 or 100, like, every baby goat needs like a clean environment with good air and, just the things that they need. So if you have the space and you think you can check the boxes in terms of providing what they need, I think, and you have a market, I think that's the most important part, is you have a connection. I think it would be worth a shot. Now you could almost, negotiate your pay point and say, for every baby that's born that's over 8 pounds, I'll pay you $3, and every baby that's under 8 pounds, I'll give you $1 or something. Because they don't do it by age, they do it by weight. So I know it definitely takes longer to get a kid that was born at 5 pounds or 4 pounds. And that might be incentive to do boar goat or I don't really know, feed a little bit more grain to your pre-fresh. But I think, anyway, I'm just rambling, but.
This is great. I don't want to cut the discussion off. We are at 12 o'clock. Daryl, if you wouldn't mind clicking to the last slide, please, just to put contact info up. Yeah, that was great. No, great that the survey slide was up. Hopefully folks got a chance to fill that out. And yeah, so here's contact info for some of the folks on the UVM Goat Dairy team. Daryl, I'm Kelsey, and I do technical assistance with Whitney Hull, and Dan Baker is co-leader on this team as well, who's been involved in all of the work, and specifically the Bucklings question and conversation. So we can stay on for a few more minutes if people have questions they want to keep talking about. Otherwise, we have recorded this. I will send out the link to the recording to everyone who registered. It will be on YouTube within about a week. And thank you all for attending. Thank you so much, Daryl, for
no problem.
Sharing this presentation.
I can be available for, a few more minutes if people want to keep talking or asking questions or sharing ideas. Or if there's any questions we didn't get to.
He's on too? That's why he's not talking. So we don't have Big White Blueberry.
I think I recognize that voice.
Yeah, feel free if you want to unmute and just talk rather than the chat.
I do have a question with the prejudice against the dairy kids. If that person is still, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. If you're still on.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Is that who exactly was showing a prejudice towards dairy kids? Like the livestock dealers or?
Yeah, this is livestock dealers, auction. There's a huge price difference.
Yeah.
At the sale barn, and like I have some buyers that specify, do you have any more of those boar crosses? I just want the boar crosses.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Have you tried working out any economics for your own farm for a project like this?
I haven't, this is sort of, we're just, I mean, obviously we've been thinking about this for years, but in any kind of organized way, it's just kind of getting started. We've dabbled in doing some of the stuff on our farm, but we've sort of, for us, it just feels like like a distraction. Like our job is like raising milkers, not bucklings, kind of a thing. But I have energy now. I mean, and this that was me 6 years ago. But I have energy now to put towards coming up with a solution. And it wouldn't be at my farm. There is like the biosecurity piece of it all, especially if you're bringing in animals from all different farms. But I would be super, super curious if there was anyone that attended this webinar who thinks they might have a facility, that we could, maybe get something started, or if they have ideas of someone who might have a facility.
I'd be happy to keep in contact with you and share information. So
Great. Okay.
I'll email you.
Okay, fantastic. That would be awesome. How are we doing, Kelsey?
Good. I think I'll stop recording, 12:07. Yeah. We're
Okay.
down to 18 participants. I think people are logging off, so I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you.
Let's see.